topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the host and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Well, hello and welcome. Bill Martinez here. Great to have you with us as this is the week that we get prepared and thinking about Memorial Day. As you know, this has always been a very special holiday for me as a Vietnam era vet. My two other brothers as well. One served in combat in the Army. My dad, of course, was a World War II vet. Memorial Day always has been meaningful for our family. I think a rather hallowed day. And when you think about it, it's Memorial Day, the holiday that makes all America's holidays possible. Now, Bill Federer, the American Minute creator, nationally known speaker, best-selling author, and president of Amerisearch, asked, what would America be without Memorial Day? Bill Federer, welcome to the show. Good to have you.
Bill, great to be with you.
Well, that's a pondersome question. What would this country be without Memorial Day, Bill?
Well, we would not have a country. And it's important for us to remember those that have given their lives. And thank you, Bill, and your family for serving in the military. For those not familiar, Veterans Day is for those that have served but are alive. And yes. Memorial Day is for those who have died. And yes. So it started in America after the Civil War. And so you had about 500,000 died in the Civil War on the Confederate side and on the Union side. Mm-hmm. And so the story is that women, and it began with Southern women, placing flowers on the graves of those who had died, both Union and Confederate. And so numerous places claim to be the source of the first Memorial Day. Some of the ones are Warrenton, Virginia, Columbus, Georgia, Savannah, Georgia, Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, Boalsburg, Pennsylvania, and Waterloo, New York. So those are all locations that have a claim to possibly being the very first Memorial Day. Mm-hmm. But one interesting one is Charleston, South Carolina. Now, there was a mass grave uncovered of 257 Union soldiers who had died in a prison camp. And on May 1st of 1865, former slaves organized a parade led by 2,800 singing Black children, and they reinterred all those bodies in respectable graves. They prayed, they read the Bible, they sang spirituals, and they reburied the soldiers with honor and an act of gratefulness for their ultimate sacrifice, for which gave them their freedom. That was Charleston, South Carolina.
You know, Bill, when you mention this, you mentioned the women and the way communities participated. I think it also brings to light something that I've always connected with Memorial Day, and that is the family unit, the loss to family. We call them Gold Star families today. Back then, it was just they were family members. But that's significant. And to me, they're as honorable as those that paid the sacrifice, because here it is. I mean, they're paying a sacrifice every day that they miss that loved one at, special events, graduations, Father's Day, go on down the line. That's an incredible price for these families who have survived their loved one as a result of, their loved one's commitment to freedom.
Yeah. And, I personally think that they get paid way too less. Here they are risking their lives and living on very meager amounts. I unfortunately get reports that even to this day, soldiers are on food stamps.
Yes.
But here they are risking their lives, and their families are are sacrificing, and the government is, not taking them as valuable as they should be regarded.
Mhm. Well, I think they should be tax-free. I think that they should not pay any taxes, and especially if there's been a death in the family. I mean, look at, Palestinians and Arabs take better care of their people who die for the sake of their jihad and their freedom than we, our own soldiers. I mean, you think about that, Bill.
Yeah, I just read a report today that said the government is wanting to discourage legacy enrollment. And you go, what's legacy enrollment?
Uh-huh.
Where a soldier's father served and the grandfather served and the great grandfather served, and they have this legacy. They said those are the soldiers that are resisting DEI.
Yeah.
The equity inclusion. They're wanting to keep the old ways. They don't want to go woke. And so here, with all the need for recruitment, the military is specifically saying we want to stop recruiting legacy enrollment, people
Right.
that use heritage. So there's a war going on inside. So years ago, I was asked by Charlie Kirk, we were doing an event together, and he goes, what do you think is the most serious threat? And I go, it's the critical race theory in the military.
Yes.
They're basically chasing out anybody that's patriotic.
Mhm.
Historically, you had Lenin chased out people from the military that were faithful to the old czarist form of government. You had Hitler chasing out people that were part of the old faithful Weimar Republic. And so this Diocletian even chased the Christians out, in the 4th century AD. And then once the transition is made, then the military was used as an enforcement of a dictator of their agenda on their own country.
Bill, let me ask you this. I mean, because what you're touching on something could have incredible ramifications in as much as that you've got a division within the military. We saw this happen recently where you had what I believe were significant quality flag officers being chased out of the branches of government. And I'm thinking, what the heck is going on here? But to your point, it's exactly that. Those officers that did not want to go along to get along and put up with this DEI nonsense, they were given early retirement, and they were forced out basically. And what could very well happen is these officers are there on the sidelines. They're observing how our freedoms are being compromised with this modern woke thought military that hasn't won a war in 70 years, Bill?
Yeah, I talked to a 30-year officer who's still in, and he was one of the few that did not want to get the vax.
Mm-hmm.
And so they took him with all of his years of being on the front lines and, Afghanistan. They put him to be the guard at a shooting range. That he just, they're specifically wanting to corner him off and demote him. And he said, I'm wondering if I'm supposed to stay in or not. And it's like, well, don't leave any sooner than you feel led, because God, he had Joseph in pagan Egypt, and he had Daniel in pagan Babylon. And so a lot of times God will have, he had Esther, right? And here you have Persia. And
for a time such as that. Exactly. Mm-hmm.
But I do think Memorial Day, we need to honor those that have given their lives and risked their lives for the freedoms that we enjoy.
Yeah. Not for pronouns, not for diversity, equity, and inclusion, but for American values, American patriotism. And that's what they're at war against. They're at war against, some would say nationalism. You've written extensively on that, Bill, how they've taken that word and turned it into a pejorative, when the fact of the matter is American nationalism is what we used to call patriotism.
Yeah. It's like, where did patriotism go in their lexicon? It's like, oh, we don't use that word anymore. We're going to use this word national. It's like, why do they call pro-life people anti-abortion?
Right.
There's no pro-life group that puts anti-abortion on their sign.
Right.
The mainstream media always calls pro-life people but why? Negative word association.
Exactly.
Why do they call American patriots nationalists? Negative word association. It's like, call us what we want. Patriots, right?
Exactly.
Lincoln's inaugural address. He said, intelligence, patriotism, Christianity are still competent to adjust in the best way all our present difficulty. Lincoln mentions patriotism and Christianity right next to each other in his inaugural. There's nothing wrong with being a Christian patriot.
Yeah.
And
as far as the left is concerned, there is a problem. We're talking with Bill Federer, the American Minute creator, and honoring Memorial Day, the true meaning of it, not what the left would want to say, but what you should be understanding, because these are some of the things that they have failed to teach our children in the public education indoctrination centers that exist today, Bill Federer.
Well, going back to the history of it, you have, again, after the Civil War, there was a General John A. Logan, and he was the commander of the veterans organization called the Grand Army of the Republic. So it was a veterans organization, but he called for a decoration day to decorate the graves of those. And he picked the date of May 30th. And James Garfield, his only executive order, he was assassinated after that, but his only executive order was in 1881, where he gave government workers May 30th off so they could decorate graves of those who had died in the Civil War. And then you have 1921, President Warren G. Harding. He had the remains of a soldier killed in France during World War I brought to America and placed in the tomb of the unknown soldier at Arlington Cemetery. Arlington Cemetery used to be the farm that belonged to Robert E. Lee, and it actually belonged to his father-in-law, George Washington Parke Custis, who was the adopted son of George Washington.
Wow.
And so that's
Didn't know
Arlington
that.
Cemetery. And but the tomb of the unknown soldier has engraved on it, "Here rests in honored glory an American soldier known but to God." And
what a great story. All that represents the tomb of the unknown soldier, and how 21 steps, how that comes into play, Bill. If you can, we got plenty of time today, so I really want to revisit the history of the, of that special monument there and that celebration.
Yeah, so it is guarded 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. I've talked to a friend of mine, had been one of those soldiers, and he would talk about the shift. Then they would go through the changing of the guard and the formality that they would follow. And then once they're on duty, they would take 21 steps, because a 21 gun salute is the highest salute.
Right.
And they would take 21 steps, and then they would turn and face the tomb for 21 seconds, and then return with the 21 steps. And they would do this continually for their shift. And I can't remember how many hours it is, but then they would do it in storm, in rain, in thunder, in ice, in freezing. And they would not allow anyone to disrespect the tomb. So they were guarding it, showing the honor that America honors not just this one soldier, we don't know his name, but all the soldiers that this represents.
Yeah, to me, that personifies the spirit of Memorial Day, Bill. Does it you?
Yeah. Calvin Coolidge, 1923, in his Memorial Day address, said there can be no peace with the forces of evil. Peace comes only through the establishment of the supremacy of the forces of good.
Yes.
That way lies through sacrifice. And he gives a scripture: greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. And so there's several assumptions. Number one, there's a good and there's a bad. Yes. And number two, it's not coexistence. It's not, no, it's you have the supremacy of the forces of, you defeat the enemy. None of this, war on terror that you don't even know when it begins and when it ends, right?
Right.
During the World War I.
Bill, let me interject here for just a moment, because you touched on something really significant here, and that is the idea of good and evil. What's really important and critical for us to understand, there is a difference, and because you don't know the difference, that's what gets you in trouble. I mean, for example, what's being manifest today on the university campuses of this country alone, I mean, it's clear they do not understand the difference between good and evil. What happened on October the 7th there in Israel to 1,400 innocents. They are confused, and they bought in, just as you talked about earlier, where they buy into a narrative that's just basically a flat out lie. But this is what the evil one wants to do: is he wants to parade as as some confusing light and misunderstanding. And here are young kids in our universities, these top universities across the country, Bill, are buying into this lie because they don't understand the difference between good and evil. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. In 1963, Congressman from Florida, Albert Herlong, read into the congressional record 45 goals or tactics of the Communist Party to take over America. Mm-hmm. And they were things like infiltrate the press, infiltrate both political parties. But one of them was infiltrate the schools and transition them into being transmission belts for communist propaganda. Wow. Take control of teachers associations. And then the other one was foment student riots and use student riots to push the socialist agenda. This is 1963. He's talking about, and so then you had Saul Alinsky, and he was a community organizer in Chicago. Hillary Clinton did her senior thesis on Saul Alinsky. Obama was an Alinsky organizer in Chicago. Saul Alinsky says that you want to foment your students to riot, but you cannot keep your followers at a high emotional level for an extended period of time. So you need to keep switching up the issues. So it's the same people and they're rioting, but there's new issues each time, and they're useful idiots. They don't really know. Exactly. And so you go from Occupy Wall Street, where they set up pup tents in downtowns, and then you go to George Floyd riots, and then the Seattle autonomous zones. And I mean, they're doing, all these different riots. It's the same group of people.
Yeah, exactly. We can't let a good crisis go to waste. Bill, should it matter that leaders like Hillary Clinton and Barack Obama, community organizer, Hillary Clinton, who was in a sense mentored by Saul Alinsky, should it matter that the leaders of our government who were in high office, that they led our country? And what contribution to those socialistic ends did they fulfill?
Yeah, it's a false promise that, I wrote a book. It's called Socialism, the Real History from Plato to the Present. Mm-hmm. Plato's the first one that talked about everybody owning everything in common. And it sounds good till you think it through. Somebody has to be in the government handing out the common stuff. And they're always going to be tempted to want to funnel a little extra to their family and friends and then keep back from those they don't like. And it gets discretionary. And the saying is, he who holds the purse strings has the power. So every attempt at everybody owning everything equally always ends up with a deep state bureaucracy passing out favors to their friends. Mm-hmm. And so socialism is a false promise. And I tell people, what if older fish could tell younger fish to stay away from shiny things dangling in the water, like a hook? But they can't. Every new generation, younger fish sees a shiny thing and they're attracted and caught. Socialism is a shiny thing dangling in the water. Free food, free clothes, free education.
Great point. Well, exactly.
Free's attractive, but there's a hook. You give up control of your life. So all these
exactly.
Things, we want social, we want free stuff. It's like you're giving up control of your life. And what the government giveth, the government can taketh awayeth.
Exactly. Bill, it's almost like, we're back to that crossroads when the children of Israel asked God for a king. And the prophet, was disturbed and he felt rejected and goes to God and says, they want a king. They want a human king. And I feel like I've been rejected. God says, no, they didn't reject you. They reject me. And then he warned him and saying, look, if you want a king, I'm going to give you a king, but I want you to understand what's going to happen. The king is going to take the very best. He's going to control your kids. Just right on down the line, he's going to tax your full head off. And exactly everything that God warned the children of Israel would happen when they, they decided to turn their back on the King of Kings, God Almighty, and and embraced a human king happened to them. And I can't help but feel like some of that dynamic has occurred here in the United States of America. What do you say?
Yeah, what makes America great? America is an experiment of people ruling themselves without a king. That's in the Declaration. It says government from the consent of the governed. Right. So you get to be in charge. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, and for the people shall not perish from the earth. So it's not government by a king ruled top down through fear, thinking that they're smarter than you are. This is where you trust the people.
Exactly.
And get involved. And so what makes America great is you, the citizen, gets to be in charge. And so the Christian nationalism used to be called Christian patriotism. And it was this idea that you get to be in charge of your life, and then all of us together are in charge of our country. And that's sort of a good thing. Getting back to the Memorial Day, World War I, poem was written named In Flanders Field.
I love that.
And by a John McCrae, and he was from Canada. He was an expeditionary gunner. And it was the classic. By the way, in Kansas City, Missouri, there is the best World War I museum ever. It's like enormous. But he describes the first use of chlorine gas. So this is John McCrae writing the poem Flanders Field, World War I, the Second Battle of Ypres near Flanders, Belgium. And he says, for 17 days and 17 nights, none of us have had our clothes off, nor our boots, even except occasionally. In all that time, while I was awake, gunfire, rifle fire never ceased for 60 seconds. And behind it all was the constant background of the sights of the dead, the wounded, the maimed, terrible anxiety, lest the line should give way. And then, of course, they would bury him, and then they would have the poppies, which were these flowers in the field. And in Flanders Field, the poppies blow between the crosses, row by row, that mark our place. And in the sky, the larks still bravely singing fly, scarce heard amidst the gun below. We are dead. Short days ago, we lived, we felt, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Field. And then the next verse, take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from falling hands we throw. The torch be yours to hold it high. If ye break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Field. And so it's this idea that you carry on the fight for freedom.
Exactly.
And
what a great poem. That's always been one of my favorites. We're talking with Bill Federer. He's the American Minute creator, nationally known speaker, and best-selling author. Bill, you look back again, this rich history of ours, less than 250 years, all things considered. But what a blessed nation by God Almighty, right?
Yeah. When you unleash human potential, that people get to pursue their dreams, they get, as Reagan said, that we get to pursue our own destiny, that you have inventions and ideas and innovations. And whereas, in where there's a monarchy or their dictator, you invent something, they just take it away. It's like, right. I spend hours in my garage and basement coming up with a new invention if it's just going to be stolen. But once you can say, no, you can get a patent on it, it's yours. Like, okay, man, I'm going to put in the time. Some of the famous people.
Property was so key, Bill, right? I mean, it was so innovative and critical to this American dream because it put the power in the hands of the people.
Yeah, and I think that, it was unique how America came to be. We were breaking away from the King of England. He was a globalist. He was a one world government guy. The sun never set on the British Empire. India, Australia, New Zealand, Hong Kong, British Guyana, Canada, Barbados, Bermuda, Jamaica, right? And America's founders decided they did not like a globalist king telling us what to do. And they broke away and flipped it and made the people the king. So kings have subjects who are subjected to their will. Republics have citizens. The word citizen is Greek. It means co-ruler, co-sovereign, co-king. And so we pledge allegiance to the flag and to the republic for which it stands. We're basically pledging allegiance to us being in charge of ourselves.
Exactly.
So when somebody protests the flag, what they're saying is, I don't want to be the king anymore. I protest this system where I participate in ruling myself. It's like, okay, somebody else will dictate your life.
Yeah, if not you, then who, right?
And, one of the stories from World War I is Sergeant Alvin York. And so my wife and I put together a book called Miracles in American History. And this is a fascinating one. He originally was a conscientious objector, but then he went ahead and prayed and felt that he was supposed to go over there. And so his group down by the Châtel-Charest rail line in France. And he said the machine guns were spitting fire, cutting down everyone around him, and all but a small number of his group were killed. And he was a country boy from backwoods Kentucky, Tennessee, and he was a sharpshooter. And so he would start picking off these machine gun turrets. And then you picking them off so much that they wouldn't lift up his head. And so he would make turkey calls. Gobble, gobble, gobble. And the guy would lift up his head, boom, he'd shoot him, And then he turns and he's being charged from behind. And he had his revolver and he had like 6 shots in his revolver. And there's like 6 guys. And he said, I shot him the way you shoot turkey. You shoot the furthest away one first. Because if you shoot the closest one, the other ones will scatter. You'll never get them. And then he turns around and he says he could shoot better standing up. And so he's standing up, making these turkey calls. And every time they pop up their head, boom, he shoots them. And then a little white flag comes up. And down march 132 Germans. And the German commander says, well, how many of you are there? And there's just Sergeant Alvin York and maybe another guy who crawls out of the bushes.
Oh, my God.
And he marches them down and nobody's about to run away because they know he's a sharpshooter and can pick them off. And so he brings them all captive and he gets the gold medal for that. And years later, somebody was questioning the story. So they sent somebody over to France to this area with a metal detector. And sure enough, one spot that they did this whole circle of spent shells right around this one spot where he said he was at. And,
even still, huh? That's amazing they were still there, Bill.
And he comes back to America and he opens a Bible school, the York Bible Institute. Gary Cooper does a movie on it. And he says, some of them officers been saying I, being a mountain boy, done these things just the right way by instinct. But he says that can't account for the way I come out alive with all that heavy fire, spitting fire on us. And then all those bombs and those men charging me from behind. He says, I only have one explanation, that God must have heard my prayers.
Exactly. And how many times did we hear of George Washington and the same thing, but for the hand of divine providence, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you had Harry S. Truman was in World War I. Eddie Rickenbacker, he was more or less the founding father of the conservative movement in America. And he had a radio program, but before then, he was a race car driver in Illinois. And then he was drafted in Indiana, and he was the driver for General Pershing. By the way, General Pershing wrote the foreword to a New Testament published by the New York Bible Society that was given out to all the soldiers.
Exactly. I remember. Yeah, right.
And so Eddie Rickenbacker sees these planes flying and he decides that he wants to be a pilot. So in the middle of the war, he just switches over, learns how to fly a plane. And
unbelievable. Oh, wow.
And he shoots down.
Can you imagine? I'm going to change my MOS in midstream. General, I'm sorry, you're going to have to find another driver. I'm going to the air, right?
Yeah. And so it's the 94th Aero Squadron, and they shoot down like 69 planes, and he gets the medal for it. And, unfortunately, one of the pilots was Quentin Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt's son. Eddie Rickenbacker said he was a great pilot and he was, shooting down, but then he was finally ambushed by the Germans and he was shot down. And Eddie Rickenbacker says, I'm not such an egotist to believe that God saved me because I'm I. He says, many other men that were more skilled and more talented than I did died. And he says, the only explanation is that God spared me because he has work for me to do, just like he has work for you to do.
Exactly. Wow.
Later in life, he says that, when the candle of life burns dim, I can say, thank God I've done my most for the country that's done the most for me. And,
what a testimony, Bill. And see, and the stories like this that you and Susie have written about, they abound. I mean, and they're just a natural outpouring of life experience of what they would probably define as themselves as ordinary men, nothing special, just ordinary men in, maybe you could say, in an extraordinary position, and they rose to the challenge, right?
Yeah. Another was Irving Berlin, and he's credited with writing "God Bless America," the famous song. Ernest Hemingway, J.R.R. Tolkien fought in World War I. C.S. Lewis fought in World War I. My grandfather, Orville William Epperson, he was from the Ozark Farm in Missouri, and he was in the 338th Machine Gun Battalion, 88th Division. And he came back from the war and married my grandmother, and had 3 children, my mom and an aunt, and then an uncle, but I never met him. He was my mom's only brother, and he died in World War II. So you have D-Day, part of Operation Overlord, which was about a month, and he was one of those that died. He was in a B-17, shot down, and they never saw him again, but the tail gunner's body washed up on the shore, and they figured that must have been where the plane went down. But his name is over there on the memorial there, where they have the D-Day memorial of the soldiers. His name was Orville Wilford Epperson.
Oh, wow.
But you had family members serve in the military, and you served in the military.
Right.
And I think that it's only proper that we give the respect and the honor to those that have given the most, paid the highest price, so that we can have the freedom to talk and share our views. And ultimately, I believe, to be able to tell people the gospel and how much God loves them.
Exactly. And most men who've been in combat and been in this situation, when you think about it, Bill, and I was looking at the numbers since 1775, I think, and they quote, and these are the numbers through 2019. So we don't have modern numbers yet, but something like 2.8 million casualties of war during that period of time. And of course, you're talking family members again. They're not included, but yet they are. They're the collateral damage, in a sense, of this ultimate price paid by their loved one, on the behalf of freedom. Because without them, that goes back to the first question we asked. What happens if America doesn't have Memorial Day? Then basically, you just have taken out the underpinnings of its very soul, haven't you?
Yeah. A friend of mine, I'll brag on him, Chris Long of Ohio Christian Alliance. And he was reading my American Minute. I sent out a little history email called American Minute, and I did one on World War II and on Franklin Roosevelt's D-Day prayer, and that the World War II memorial in Washington, D.C. had 0 acknowledgments of God. The Lincoln Memorial has 5 quotations mentioning God. The Lincoln Memorial has quotations mentioning God. Other ones do, but not the World War II memorial. So he got his congressman, Bill Johnson, Senator Rob Portman, and they put forth a bill. It took 10 years to get through, raise the millions of dollars, and right next in all the approval processes that you have to go through. So about 50 yards away from the World War II memorial is the Circle of Remembrance. And it has Franklin Roosevelt's D-Day prayer on 4 bronze plaques. Wow. And Franklin Roosevelt was a Democrat, so the Democrats voted for it, the Republicans voted for it. But Franklin Roosevelt gave this prayer June 6, 1944. My fellow Americans, I ask you to join me in prayer. Almighty God, our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion. What religion is he talking about? Well, Franklin Roosevelt passed out Gideon's New Testaments and Book of Psalms to all the soldiers. And he wrote the foreword. As Commander-in-Chief, I take pleasure in commending the reading of the Bible. And at this time, 93% of the country identified as Christian.
Exactly.
20% Protestant, 24% Catholic. The cadets in the military had to go through either chapel service was mandatory, and it's either Protestant, Catholic, or Jewish. And about 3% of the country was Jewish. Anyway, so here's Franklin Roosevelt. Our sons, pride of our nation, this day have set upon a mighty endeavor, a struggle to preserve our republic, our religion, and our civilization. Give the strength to their arms, stoutness to their hearts, steadfast to their faith. The road will be long and hard. Enemy is strong, may hurl them back. We know that by thy grace and by thy righteousness, our cause, our sons will triumph. And then he says, some will never return. Embrace these, Father. And he says, into and receive them, thy heroic servants, into thy kingdom.
Wow.
And so that's what we do. We're acknowledging these heroic servants. And Eisenhower put a soldier in the tomb of the unknown soldier from World War II and the Korean War. And it was Ronald Reagan that put a soldier in the World War II memorial, the tomb of the unknown soldier from the Vietnam War.
Vietnam, right, exactly.
1984.
Bill, that's amazing to think that World War II, we weren't that far removed. I mean, you still had, a dominant belief system in God in America during World War II. Why would they omit God from that memorial?
All the designers left it out.
It just seems to me that was done on purpose.
Yes. And one of them was even a quote from FDR where he said, "We'll gain the inevitable triumph." But you read the quote, it says, "We'll gain the inevitable triumph, so help us God." But they just want to add those, "so help us God." Oh, we didn't have enough space on the stone to add that. And it's like, come on, right? And but thank God we now have, they just dedicated it last year, the Circle of Remembrance. It's the only place on the whole mall in Washington, D.C. dedicated to a prayer. So if you go up there, you have to go to that Circle of Remembrance and pray for our country. An interesting trivia that Reagan put the soldier from the Vietnam War. A family had some suspicion that it could have been their son. And they spent a decade through the process of getting that tomb unsealed and doing a DNA test. And sure enough, the Vietnam War soldier was Michael Blassie, and he flew a A-37B Dragonfly, a Dragonfly plane, and he was shot down near An Lac, Vietnam. He had graduated from the Air Force Academy in 1970. Prior to that, he graduated from St. Louis University High School in 1966, which is my alma mater.
Oh, wow.
So I graduated in 76. He graduated in 66 from St. Louis University High School. And so they took his remains out of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and reburied them in St. Louis in Jefferson Barracks Park. So that used to be a big Civil War fort, and now it's a park, but they have a cemetery there.
Did they find another unknown Vietnam casualty to replace him in the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, Bill?
No, they said because of DNA testing that from now on, they'll be able to know who it is. So there's no more, just the Korean War is the last person that we have in there.
Right.
But in the year 2000, Congress passed the National Moment of Remembrance Act, where on Memorial Day at 3 p.m., citizens should pause for a moment of prayer. Quote, Congress finds that it is essential to remember and renew the legacy of Memorial Day to pay tribute to individuals who have made the ultimate sacrifice in service of the United States. Greater strides must be made to demonstrate appreciation for those loyal people whose values represent their sacrifices, are critical to the future of the United States, encourage citizens to dedicate themselves to the principles for which those heroes of the United States died. Symbolic act of unity to honor men and women of the United States who died in the pursuit of freedom and peace as a day of prayer and permanent peace. So,
well, that time we need to mark on our calendars, from now to perpetuity, 3 o'clock every Memorial Day, we pause for prayer to commemorate and remember those that sacrificed their lives for the freedoms that we enjoy today. Right, Bill?
Yeah. A famous poem written by an Army soldier, Charles Michael Province, and you may have heard it, but it's worth repeating. It's short. It is the soldier, not the minister, who has given us freedom of religion. It's the soldier, not the reporter, who's given us freedom of press. It's the soldier, not the poet, who's given us freedom of speech. It's the soldier, not the campus organizer, who's given us freedom to protest. It's the soldier, not the lawyer, who's given us the right to a fair trial. It's the soldier, not the politician, who's given us the right to vote. It's the soldier who salutes the flag, serves beneath the flag, and whose coffin is draped with the flag, who allows the protesters to burn the flag. But it's this recognition that if we had not had the soldiers fight and defend our country, what would be left? It
Exactly.
would be a gang war on a global scale. And basically a king is a gang leader. You'd have a Russian gang leader, a Chinese gang leader, a North Korean gang leader, an Iranian gang leader. It will be a gang war on a global scale. And America has pushed back against that. And we're this unique form of government where we're not ruled by a gang, we're ruled by the people.
Exactly.
And it's our job.
Bill, in a sense, though, Bill, with this force in this movement for a globalist rule, aren't we setting ourselves up for some form or fashion of, a gang, tyranny?
Yeah, I think, Jesus says wheat and tares grow together till the harvest.
Right.
One of the books, I just finished a book, it's called Silence Equals Consent, but in the beginning of it, go through how the default setting for human government is gangs. If we were to get rid of all police tomorrow, you'd have gangs.
Mm-hmm.
And the gang leaders would demand loyalty. And the first recorded instance of this is Nimrod Tower of Babel.
Right.
So the Noah's Ark lands at Mount Ararat, down that valley, Tigris, Euphrates rivers, the Fertile Crescent, Mesopotamia. And that's where civilization, according to most anthropologists, originated. And then from that point, the languages and the people migrated out. But that's where they were at. And Nimrod wanted to build a tower so high, according to Josephus, the Jewish commentator, that if God destroyed the world again with a flood, you could survive on top. So it had this defiant, in-your-face attitude toward God. And Nimrod made everyone bake bricks and bring them, or he would kill them. So it was oppressive over man. God comes down. So the Tower of Babel was, in a sense, the first attempt at a one-world government. And God comes down, confuses the languages, and the people scatter into language groups that turn into nations.
Right.
Nations were God's invention to postpone a one-world government. But every generation, you have a king that wants to conquer other nations. And if left unchecked, they'd have been happy to conquer the whole world. So in that sense, death is a blessing, right? And so these dictators, Nimrod, Pharaoh, Caesars, Kaisers, Sultans, they die off. And then the devil has to pick up where he left off and find another greedy, ambitious person. But he can use the latest military advancements. And so instead of Cain killing Abel with a rock, they can kill with a bronze weapon, an iron weapon, a phalanx spear, scimitar, sword. The weapon improves, but it's that same fallen nature. Israel, when they first came out of Egypt for 400 years, was an anomaly that you had no people and no king. It's called the Hebrew Republic until they asked for a king. But that period was what inspired the colonists in America. So that's why they taught Hebrew at Yale and Harvard. And so we were, and more or less, the Puritans wanted to continue that Hebrew Republic experiment, right? Of everybody taught the law and accountable to God to follow it. And so it unleashed this country where people could pursue their dreams and their visions. And you could come across the border. We lived in Dallas, and there was this family that was very successful. And the dad had come across from Mexico, did not speak English. He pushed a lawnmower. And then he got a little cement mixer, and he would put in driveways and patios. And then he got a cement truck, and then a pickup truck, and then a dump truck. And before you know it, he's putting in driveways, he's putting in streets, he's putting in. And so when we knew the family, they were putting in a section of the Interstate 635.
Oh my gosh.
We're talking multiple lanes and bridges and highways and off ramps and on ramps, and
all from a lawnmower, right? Unbelievable. Only in America.
English, and it all happened in one generation. And then we moved from Texas back to Missouri, where I'm originally from, and there were grown men boycotting a Dollar General with their little umbrellas, saying, don't buy from the Dollar General because they didn't use our labor, right? And my daughter, right? She's in grade school. She's like, get a life.
Yeah.
It's like every day she'd drive by these grown men sitting there in front of a Dollar General saying, don't buy the Dollar General because they didn't. And we come from Texas where you can start with nothing and become successful. And she's like, So it's this idea that instead of, if you get a bigger piece of the pie, you're taking away from me. But down there it was, no, just buy a new pie. Just
Exactly.
create a new industry,
Right. Well, and that's that's the provision of God himself. God doesn't give in such a way, Bill, that he takes from you to give to me. It comes from his ever ending, sustenance and supply. That's God, whether it's God's grace or God's provision, it's never ending. But see, this is where the conflict comes into play and the paradox, because when you're with God, you understand that it's never ending. But when you're with the evil one, you don't understand the ways of God and the ways of the kingdom, do you?
No. Memorial Day, it's all throughout the Bible. The Passover is a memorial to remember how God delivered the children of Israel from the angel of death in Egypt. Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary gives a definition of memorial: that which preserves the memory of something. A monument is a memorial of a deceased person or an event. The Lord's Supper is a memorial to the death and suffering of Christ. Exactly. So here in the very dictionary, it's talking about a memorial, but it's talking about we have a memorial and it's communion. We're remembering what Jesus did. And the Jews remember Passover. And so in Exodus chapter 12, the Lord tells the children of Israel, speaking to the congregation of Israel, on the 10th day of the month, they shall take every man a lamb according to the house. Your lamb will be without blemish. You shall keep it till the 14th day. The whole assembly of Israel shall kill it in the evening, take the blood, strike it on the 2 doorposts. I'll pass through the land of Egypt and execute judgment. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you, for this shall be unto you for a memorial.
Memorial.
Out your generations, an ordinance forever.
Well, it is a true gift of God, isn't it? And he gives us things like that to remember, because we're in our own humanness. It's so easy for us to forget, Bill, right? We've got a couple of minutes left, and I want to give you some time to kind of summarize again what we've been talking about, the significance of Memorial Day, the holiday that makes all America's holidays possible.
Calvin Coolidge summed it up best in his Memorial Day address, May 31st, 1923. He gives a little history. He says, settlers came here from mixed motives. Generally defined, they were seeking a broader freedom. They were intent upon establishing a Christian commonwealth in accordance with the principles of self-government. It had been said that God sifted the nations that he might send choice grain into the wilderness. And then Coolidge was citing in a sermon by a famous governor in Massachusetts, William Stoughton. And he said, God sifted the whole world that he might send choice grain over into the wilderness. In other words, who came to America? It's pretty courageous people. They risked this boat ride. Many of them, mortgaged their homes. Many of them fled from persecutions. And so the people that came here were not lazy. And they were not coming over looking for a welfare check. These were people that said, look, just give me an opportunity. I'm going to work hard.
And half of them died, Bill, on the first year, right?
Yeah, the Pilgrims. Yeah. Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote A Courtship of Miles Standish. But in there, he had a line, God sifted 3 kingdoms to find the wheat for planting. And then Ben Franklin, Benjamin Franklin Morris, he writes in 1864, the persecution of the Puritans in England for nonconformity, the religious agitations and conflicts in Germany by Luther, in Geneva by Calvin, in Scotland by Knox, were the preparatory ordeals in qualifying Christian men for work of establishing civil institutions on the American continent. God sifted in these conflicts a whole nation that he might send choice grain over to the wilderness, and the blood and persecution of the martyrs became the seed of both church and the state. It was in these schools of fiery trial that the founders of the American Republic were educated, prepared for their grand Christian mission. They were trained in stormy trials in order to prepare them in establishing the fundamentals, principles of civil and religious liberty. And then concluding his address, Calvin Coolidge said, They had a genius for organized society on the foundations of piety, righteousness, liberty, obedience, law. Who can fail to see in it the hand of destiny? Who can doubt it was guided by divine providence?
Exactly.
And then the last quote I have is from Douglas MacArthur. And he told the West Point cadets, May 1962, the soldier above all other men is required to practice the greatest act of religious training, sacrifice. In battle and in the face of danger and death, he discloses those divine attributes which his maker gave when he created man in his own image. No physical courage, no brute instinct can take the place of divine help, which alone can sustain him. However horrible the incidents of war may be, the soldier who is called upon to offer and to give his life for his country is the noblest development of mankind.
Well, Bill Federer, I cannot thank you enough for the history lesson and, setting us up for this year's Memorial Day. It is an appointment that we will meet at 3:00 in the afternoon on Memorial Day to pause and pray and thank God and pray for those families that still carry in their hearts the loss of a loved one who surrendered it all for our freedoms today. Bill Federer, thank you so much for being with us. Take care, my friend.
Thank you, Bill.
And thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for sharing a part of your day with us. May God bless you and keep you. May he make his face to shine upon you. May he be gracious unto you and give you his peace. Have a great day. God bless.